Hello and welcome to Terrain Oddity. My name is Jay and today I'm going to be making some rocky area terrain. It's pretty cheap, pretty easy, and if you play a game where you need some difficult terrain that's difficult to move over, that maybe provides heavy or light cover that's rocky, well, this is what I've got in store for you today. It's really simple if I'm honest. I'm going to get some garden stones, put them on a base and then flock it. But a little bit more to it than that, a few more different options that I just want to walk through. But yeah, I'm going to be using these for Star Wars Legion, and it's area terrain, that's difficult terrain, that's heavy cover, and that's rare in the game. But yeah, it's a pretty simple to use, pretty simple to get. But before we go through all that, if at the end of this video you like the video, do like the video. And if you've not subscribed yet and you're interested in terrain, then please do consider doing that, as it really does help. I am probably going to start posting links and a table of all the products that I use. Keep in mind that these might be affiliate links, and if you don't want to support me like that, then keep that in mind. Though really, for the materials for this one, you're literally going to need a base and some stones. Now, the stones you can probably find in your garden or just out and about. I have said this before. Do not get caught stealing stones, you will look absolutely crazy. So let's get on and I'll show you how I made both those pieces at the start, and there'll be pictures at the end, etc. First things first is your base, and in this case I am using, I think they call it EPVC. It is essentially like a plastic that you can cut with a sharp blade. I actually use scissors because I'm really lazy, and I just use a worn down pair of scissors. Yeah, the base though, it could be MDF. You could even do it with a CD. I do make a version of this with a CD if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, you need your base. I just draw out the rough size of the terrain that I want. In this case, I'm aiming for games 28mm scale and a decent size. I would say maybe 6 inches by 6, but not a perfect circle and not a square or something like that. Just a natural looking shape. When you've cut out your shape, you're going to have to bevel the edges of your base if possible. So all you do there is take a knife and you're going to cut essentially at a 45-degree angle all around your base of your terrain, just to blend it in with the board later on. So once you've cut out all of your bases, however many you want, you're obviously going to need the stones. As I said, you do not want to get caught stealing stones. I've bought a house that has some decent stones just literally in the gutter of the paths. So just keep in mind, this should be relatively easy to buy. You can buy things like slate stones on eBay for a couple of pounds. I won't be putting a link to that, but if you have no other options, and that's not a bad shout there. And then we're going to glue the stones to the base. Now, there is an extra step that I would take, especially if you're using this EPVC stuff, it can be a little bit hydrophobic. It doesn't like having liquids on it. So I would recommend at the bare minimum putting some filler down. Now, I don't do this on one of them just to prove that you don't necessarily have to use filler. But if I would recommend filler, as it is a very easy material to get. Filler is spackle, I think, for you Americans. Put that down on your base. Now, what I actually use on my desert ones in particular, I actually use Sculptor Mold, which is like a modeling compound. I know Luke APS, he sells some of it, but I think for the price and the postage, I just got mine off Amazon Prime for the big bag of Sculptor Mold. I enjoyed using the Sculptor Mold because 1, it dries quickly, and 2, it gives a nice rocky, natural, bumpy surface. You could use DAS modelling clay. DAS modelling clay, you can get a decent sized pack for £5. The Sculptor Mold is about £11. Whatever you do, I'd say, sort out your base first. So put the Sculptor Mold down if that's what you're going to use. Do the filler first if that's what you're going to do. And if you are using Sculptor Mold, you can just literally push the stones into the Sculptor Mold and it'll pretty much stick. Or you don't necessarily have to do that, and if you could skip straight to gluing your stones onto the bases. Now, hot glue probably works the best here. It probably creates the best bond. You could probably use super glue, but just keep in mind I actually used a hot glue gun. So the one thing I want to say when I'm gluing the rocks, you can go for more rocks if you want a very rugged look. The one problem with that is you might find that you can't play on it. I do think the Sculptor Mold really helps with the undulations and that kind of stuff, but just keep in mind, the more rocks you add, the less practical it might be for your models to stand on them. I've generally left little corridors for my models to fit in. It's up to you to go with what you want. Do you want more realistic or do you want functional? It's your call, basically. Once you've glued your stones onto your base, it's as simple as literally, getting some sand, if that's what you're going to use. You could use like tile grate if you wanted, and your PVA. And for the PVA, as I said, on this plastic, it sometimes won't stick properly. You'll sometimes have like little areas where it seems to have like dried and it won't glue down. But you spread your PVA all over your base. Make sure you use an old brush, because you don't want to use your new fancy brushes. You can obviously wash them once you've finished, but use a brush and just get it right up to the stones. You want to make sure it's like it's touching the stones essentially. Try not to get sand on the stone. I made that mistake and got a little bit of sand on my stone, and it just doesn't really fit with the texture of the stone. But don't make my mistakes. Once you've got your sand on everywhere, you might want to go back over it with the areas that you missed, and put once it's dried, put a little bit more PVA glue, and then put the sand on the areas you've missed. I'm using literally bird sand, which I bought from Wilkinson's in the UK, but any sand will do essentially. Once your sand is dried, you've got your stones on there, we're looking pretty good. The next thing we're going to do is simply paint the whole thing. Right now, if you're doing the grasslands one, I get burnt umber, mix it in with PVA and a tiny bit of water just to help spread it a little bit, and then we're going to literally paint the whole thing in that. And the reason we're going to add PVA and paint is simply just to help the sand adhere to the plastic. Now, if you're using stuff like the Sculptor Mold, you probably don't even need to add the PVA, but if you're not using that and you're going straight onto this plastic, do make sure you do like a PVA coat. And as I said, I'm going to mix I'm going to use burnt umber and PVA. I'm going to cover the whole thing for the grasslands, the rocky, muddy ones. For the desert, I think I also used the brown colour, the burnt umber, just because I had it. I'm going to go over that with Xandri Dusk-esque colour, but each to their own. Once you've let that dried, obviously the problem with this is that generally there's a lot of drying time, so you're going to have to do the sand, let that dry overnight, do the paint, let that dry overnight. We're essentially ready to dry brush, and for the rocks I start off with a dark grey. I think it might be Grey Storm from Americana or something like that. Then I use just a mid grey, which is called a warm grey, and then I add a bit of white to my grey and dry brush the rocks, and that's going to look pretty fantastic for the greys. For the ground, it's just add a bit of white to burnt umber and just keep going until you're satisfied, or you can go with like a chocolatey brown, whatever you use for your bases. Don't use your Games Workshop paints, but whatever kind of colour you use for your bases, find a similar colour in a hobby store and use that. And then literally for the grasslands, that's pretty much all done. All we're going to do is flock it with grass and lichen and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, for that stage you're literally just going to get some PVA, whack it straight on the base. I wet my brush and just put it wherever I want. Generally when I'm doing flock, I'm going to use Weeds colour from Woodland Scenics, which is like a dark green. Whack that in where it would be dark, like near the rocks. Burnt grass for the middles where it's a highlight, and then blended turf for the whole thing. And literally then add a few tufts, add your lichen, and the Woodlands one is pretty much done. It's a very easy, cheap, effective bit of terrain. There's nothing complicated here at all, really. For the desert, I did do it a little bit of a different way. I painted the ground in Xandri Dust and the rocks in what I think it's Cocoa from Americana. It's sort of like a chocolatey brown colour. I then did a Ushabti Bone colour match dry brush all over the whole thing. Just before I'm going to do a wash, I really like to sometimes get the highlights and then tone them down. So I then did a wash, which was Agvaxer shade on the ground and Ceresepia on the rocks. Let that whole thing dry, and then I'm going to dry brush Xandri Dust colour onto the ground, and then a Ushabti Bone onto the ground. And for the rocks, I go back to the original chocolatey brown, and then I actually just added white to that chocolatey brown as I went up, leaving the colour on my brush just so it went gradually slightly higher in colour. You could just go with like a khaki or even the Ushabti Bone again if you wanted. And again, tough that up, put some lichen on it, and you're done. Really, really simple terrain, very cheap, free if you really wanted it to be and you've already got a base. Once you've finished with all your flocking, etc., make sure you give the whole thing a spray of watered down PVA. 50-50 is like a good mix. That'll just make sure everything's sealed and nothing comes off, but we've already PVA'd it before, so it's only the flock we're really bothered about at that point. So honestly, really easy to do. It's like even weird just making the tutorial. As long as you've got a base, you could use a CD. I've got a picture of a CD one somewhere. You've got your base. You can find some stones in your garden. You glue your stones to the base, then you sand it. Then you paint the whole thing with a bit of PVA to make sure it sticks. And then you dry brush up the relative colours, so brown for the ground and grey for the rocks. Flock it, and you're done. Really, like for something like Star Wars Legion, this is just a godsend. It's a very simple bit of terrain. Now, the way that I actually glued my rocks, you could say, oh, it doesn't look very rocky, Jay. It looks a little bit like nice. Feel free to go a little bit more insane. Like here, I've got the Sculptor Mold stuff that does look a little bit more undulating, but obviously I wanted to do a version without it. And you could actually do more stones, but the reason I've picked like areas where there are no stones is simply so that they're usable. If there were too many stones, my models would have difficulty staying on them. So it's one of those cases where I've gone with practicality over, you know, style, I guess. But yeah, just a tutorial I wanted to get out because I see a lot of like tables without area terrain, and I don't know how that necessarily applies to 40k. Hopefully something like that is useful, but it's a very easy way of getting difficult area terrain. And you know, you can't, if you've got a base, or if you've got old CDs and you've got some stones and you already have your basic materials, it could essentially be free. That's how cheap these could be. So yeah, that's the end of this tutorial. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if you think I could have done anything differently. I might come back with a more realistic build of this like in a couple of months, but I think I'm very, very happy with the effect. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do like and subscribe. Have a beautiful day, and if you've got anybody who plays like Legion or you think this terrain would be useful for, just show them the video. As I said, I'll try and do links to like products that I mention. I might not have everything at release, but I'll do it the next day, as soon as I can, basically. Have a beautiful day, and goodbye.